It's not all that often that we get wowed by a Disney Vacation Club villa, but the one-bedroom villa we stayed at here at Disney's Riviera Resort, that's the exception. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Disney's Riviera. Today, I'm doing a bit of a review, specifically of the one-bedroom villa here that we recently stayed at. I know that this is highly anticipated by many of you, especially because you know how I feel about the Riviera Resort. And you know, I have to say, after staying in this one bedroom, I'm starting to get a little bit of a better sense why some of you really enjoy this resort. We're gonna talk all about it. Let's find a shady spot though, and then we'll get into it. Now, today's review is going to be a little bit different. Generally, when we do a resort and room review, I like to go over all of the nitty-gritty about a resort. We're going to talk about some details here at the Riviera, but I'm not going to really dig into things like I have in the past, mainly because we talk about the Riviera all the time, and we've also reviewed the Riviera before. That said, I do want to go over some basics, so let's talk about the resort itself. First and foremost, Disney's Riviera Resort is a Disney Vacation Club resort. That means that it's going to come at a higher price tag if you're choosing to pay cash, but also it has Disney Vacation Club villas, which means a wider range of room types. This can make it a great choice not only for Disney Vacation Club members, but also families who have a bigger traveling party and want a little bit more space. Disney Vacation Club villas also have rooms that have kitchenettes. You can find that in a deluxe studio. They also have rooms that have full kitchens, like you'll find in a one-bedroom villa, like the one we stayed at, as well as larger rooms. Now, Disney's Riviera Resort is located on the Skyliner, which means you have easy access to Epcot through the International Gateway, as well as Hollywood Studios. You can also use the Skyliner to get over to Art of Animation and Pop Century. Art of Animation is one of our favorite resorts to wander around with little kids, and it's a great place to check out if you happen to be traveling with little ones. Of course, you're also walking distance from Disney's Caribbean Beach Resort, which is one of our favorite places to grab a quick bite because they have some fantastic dining over there. Of course, there are some fun treats that you can get over at Art of Animation and Pop Century if you want to make your way out there as well. And all of this together means you have a lot of great dining options outside of your resort, but that's not to say that there aren't fantastic dining options here at Riviera as well. We talk about it all the time. It's one of our favorite places to eat, specifically Primo Piatto, which is their quick service location. And I've heard great things about Bar Rivo, which is their pool bar, as well as Topolino's Terrace, which is a table service dining option here. We haven't eaten there yet though. I know it's on the list. It's just that we keep coming here and Primo Piatto is such a great option that we keep getting distracted, okay? It's the long and short of it. Of course, there are some downsides to being along the Skyliner because it does have direct access to Epcot and you can make your way to Hollywood Studios on the Skyliner as well. You don't have buses to Hollywood Studios or Epcot running from Riviera. I know that this is something that sometimes people say happens. It does when there's inclement weather and the Skyliner goes down, but it's not a regular thing. And so if you're thinking about staying here and you have a problem with heights or the Skyliner isn't for you, that's something you're going to want to factor into your budget because you're going to have to figure out how to get yourself to Epcot and Hollywood Studios using either a rideshare or rental car because your only Disney transportation option on most days is going to be that Skyliner. I really can't emphasize that enough when we're talking about any of the Skyliner resorts. If you're headed to a place that the Skyliner serves, you're not going to have bus access. Now, we've talked about the Skyliner in the past, so I'm not going to get too much into it, but I do want to note that if you're traveling with a stroller or a mobility device to include ECVs and wheelchairs, you can get on the Skyliner with relative ease. So it's not something that you have to concern yourself with whether you're staying here at Riviera or any of the Skyliner resorts. Now, in terms of amenities, this resort has much of what you might come to expect from any other Walt Disney World resort. They have some activities, some lawn games. They also have 2 pools and a splash pad. To me, while these pools are nice, they're not really standout, which I wouldn't have expected from the quiet pool, but in terms of a feature pool, I would have loved to see a little bit more theming, though they do have a great theme over at the splash pad. Now, another thing that I really like about the Riviera is that it's a tower resort. Now, I know that this isn't everyone's cup of tea, but I like this type of resort because it's built up rather than out, and everything is located within one building, which means you don't have to do a lot of walking around outside. And while I know there are a lot of people out there who like to stroll around their resort, this is something that I personally enjoy because, you know, sometimes you want to run down and get something from the quick service, maybe grab ice cream or coffee, and you don't have to leave the resort in order to do that. Speaking of coffee, they also have a coffee shop here. I didn't mention that when I listed off the dining options. It's not technically a dining option, but it's notable because it's great. Now, before we get into our review of this one bedroom, which, like I said, I'm super excited to talk to you about because we thought it was absolutely beautiful, I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that I don't like about the Riviera. I know we've talked about this at length in the past, so I'm not going to really dig into it today, but there are a few things that kind of got cemented as downsides of the Riviera during the stay that I already didn't like before, but we'll get into that here in a second. So I personally have some opinions of the Riviera based on location. I'm not going to get into that. That's my personal opinion. I also think that the Riviera lacks a little bit in terms of being a deluxe resort, especially as a Disney Vacation Club resort. It doesn't quite have that thing that you find from other deluxe resorts here at Walt Disney World, and for me that is again a downside. That said, another major criticism that I have of this resort is it just doesn't feel well thought out. Things like the small hallways, the very small staircase that leads to the lobby, these are opinions that I've had about the resort since my first visit, and they're things that can't easily change, so my opinion isn't likely to change. That said, during this stay, it wasn't just me and Russ visiting, it was also some family members, one of whom uses an ECV, and as they were making their way throughout the resort, one of the things that they mentioned to me is that it was just so tight using their ECV that they didn't feel comfortable getting around. And I will say they use a very small ECV that isn't very cumbersome, and I totally understand where they're coming from because even I felt like these were really small halls that just made it feel difficult to move throughout the resort. So anyway, having their opinion on this kind of cements how I feel about that. And I do think that while you can still get around and you still shouldn't have a problem, I think it's worth noting that yes, these halls are very narrow, the space is very narrow, and this is especially notable for those of you who might be renting a larger ECV and you're not necessarily comfortable with that ECV. But okay, let's talk a little bit about the room itself. Now, we booked a deluxe studio and we were upgraded to a 1-bedroom villa with a preferred view. Here at the Riviera, that preferred view has you looking out over Disney's Caribbean Beach, and ours in particular had us looking out over the pool. But we'll get more into that here in a bit. Like I said, this is a 1-bedroom villa, which means it sleeps 5. There's a separate bedroom. There's also a living area that doubles as a sleeping area. There's also a full kitchen. Like I mentioned, this room wowed us the second that we stepped into it, not only because it was lovely, but also because of the layout. This room isn't laid out like standard 1-bedroom villas that you'll find around Walt Disney World, and in my opinion, it addressed many of the problems that I have with 1-bedroom villas. It definitely felt more open, there was more seating available, and we really loved the dining area because the entire family would be able to sit around the table without having to rearrange furniture. The room felt spacious and open. We also loved the color as well as the lighting elements throughout the room. It really did feel kind of luxurious. It felt a step up from what we're used to here at Disney Vacation Club villas, especially at some of the current Disney Vacation Club villas that haven't been updated in quite some time. We especially liked the use of space in the room. There were a lot of places to tuck things away, which makes the room feel bigger because it's ultimately less cluttered. And I really appreciated how unique some elements of the room were. Notably, the booth by the kitchen table had unique Riviera specific elements, which really stood out to us, and we hope that this is something that hangs around. Now, as I mentioned, the room is lovely, and I can see why so many of you say that this is where the Riviera shines, even though it lacks in other areas. Of course, the room did have some areas where it was lacking, although it's not a very long list, so let me share that with you. The first thing that stood out to us, and honestly kind of reminded us of an experience we had over at Port Orleans, was the number of outlets available throughout the room. You know, with so many devices that we have during our Disney vacations, we're always keeping an eye out for outlets because, you know, you're going to be charging your Magic Band Pluses, your phones, any other electronic that you happen to be bringing with you, including things like portable fans. So it's really important to have a place to do that. And here at this room, it just didn't feel like there were enough places to plug everything in, certainly not in convenient locations. Honestly, the layout of the plugs felt a little bit outdated to us. Again, like something that we've seen over at Port Orleans. For example, I would have loved to see more plugs nearby the television, maybe on either side, someplace that we could put everything all in one spot rather than having to spread it out throughout the room. That just leads to confusion, it leads to things getting left behind and lost, and I didn't really like that. The room itself did have some dents and dings, nothing particularly notable, but it was on some pieces of furniture that you wouldn't expect to see dents and dings on. on, leading me to believe that maybe the quality wasn't quite there when they chose those pieces. Again, that happens though. These rooms get used and abused. So I have to say, for rooms that are as old as these are, I know that they're still new, but they're not brand new. I didn't really see a whole lot of wear and tear. Certainly not as much as I saw over at the cabins, even though we were there 5 days after it opened. Now, another thing that we thought was a bit of a downside for this room was the view. This is a preferred view, which means it comes at a higher price point, whether you're using points or you're paying cash. And it has us looking out over Disney's Caribbean beach. And in our case, we were also looking out over the pool. Now, this was a lovely view, don't get me wrong, but was it what I would consider a preferred view, and would I consider it worth the price? Certainly not. And that actually brings us to the biggest downside of this room, which is the price per night. This room during our stay was 48 points per night for the preferred view. And yes, this was an upgrade for us, so we didn't pay 48 points, but if you choose this room, that's what you're going to be paying, especially for this preferred view. And I think that that's absolutely outrageous. By comparison, a one-bedroom villa at Bay Lake Tower with a preferred view is 46 points per night, and that has you looking out over Magic Kingdom so you can enjoy the fireworks every evening. This has you looking out over Caribbean Beach. Now again, is it a lovely view? Yes. Is it worth the price? Definitely not. But of course, that's just my opinion. Now, in terms of price per night, I do find that the Riviera is a little bit on the high end, not only for this one bedroom, but also for the Tower Studio, which I have some opinions on. Quite frankly, I feel like the Tower Studio does not do this resort justice in any way, but that's a completely different discussion. Of course, it depends on where your priorities are. If you want a newer resort, if you want the Skyliner route, then that might be fine for you. For me, it doesn't feel worth it. Now, there's one other thing that I wanted to mention. I totally forgot about it, so bear with me as I make my way back to some of the downsides of this room, and that was the cleanliness. Now, the room itself was relatively clean, but the shower was lacking. And I know this is something that we talk about every once in a while, depending on where we're staying, but for me, it stood out because you know, you have this beautiful room and then you step into the shower and you're like, hold on, has this been cleaned recently? And yes, this is a consequence of hard water. People always say, maybe you've never experienced hard water before, it's difficult to clean. It's not that difficult. You can manage it. There are things you can do. I wish Disney would do that at resorts like this, especially because it stands out so much. And at Disney Vacation Club Villas, they don't get cleaned every single day, so it needs a little bit extra effort when you do clean things, you know? But at the end of the day, what did I think of this resort? You know, I still feel the same way about it. It's really not for me. While the rooms are beautiful when I choose a resort, it's more about the location, and the Riviera falls short, in my opinion. Of course, I'd love to hear yours, so leave it in a comment down below. Also, if you've ever stayed here, I'd love to hear your experience, so share it with me. But for now, I'm off. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Until then. Bye.